The whistle blew once, then nothing. Vera Hollis stood in the middle of a red dirt road in Calderfield, Texas. The dust had not settled yet. The iron wheels were still warm somewhere behind her. She did not turn around to look. In her skirt pocket she had 29 words. In her hands she had one travel bag and a wooden box of sewing thread and needles. In front of her was the most ruined house she had ever seen in her life. She stood there for a moment, not thinking about what she should do next. Thinking at least there is no one here watching me right now. Then she picked up her bag, and she walked toward it. The house had two walls standing. The roof had caved in on the left side, the boards split and dark with water rot. The front door hung from a single hinge, swinging very slowly in the July wind, the way a tired thing moves when it has given up trying to stay still. The yard was cracked clay and dead grass, and one old cottonwood tree standing in the corner like it had been there long before the house was built and expected to be there long after. Vera set her bag down at the edge of the yard. She looked at the cottonwood tree for a moment. It was still alive, growing in that hard ground, roots down deep in that cracked clay where nothing else seemed to want to grow. She picked her bag back up and went inside. The east wall was the strongest. She pressed her palm flat against it, solid. Old timber dried hard by years of Texas heat, but holding. She looked up. That section of roof was still intact, enough to sleep under, enough to start from. She set the wooden box down on the floor, sat beside it, took the folded paper from her skirt pocket. 29 words. She had counted them on the train, counted them again at the station in St. Louis where she changed lines, counted them one more time somewhere in Oklahoma when she woke up at 2 in the morning with her cheek against the window glass and could not remember where she was. Miss Hollis, my brother made promises he had no right to make. The arrangement is void. Do not present yourself at the property. C. Hale. Clifton Hale. Not Daniel. Daniel was the one who had written to her. Daniel was the one who had filled 3 pages with careful sentences about the morning light on the Texas hills and the way the grass moved in a south wind and what it felt like to stand on your own land and know it was yours. Daniel was the one who had asked her what she wanted, not what she could do, not what she was good at, what she wanted. No one had asked Vera Hollis that question in a long time. Daniel Hale died in January. Pneumonia. Cold came hard that winter. His younger brother Clifton inherited everything, including the contract Daniel had signed with a woman in Cincinnati who was now standing inside a ruined house in Calderfield, Texas, with 29 words in her pocket and $47 to her name. Vera refolded the letter, put it back in her pocket. She did not cry. She had thought about crying on the train in the dark when there was nothing to look at outside the window and nothing to do with her hands. But she had not cried then, and she was not going to cry now. She was 34 years old. She had been the best seamstress on Baker Street in Cincinnati for 11 years. She had sewn wedding dresses and burial suits and everything in between. She had worked 6 days a week and saved carefully and written careful letters to a man she had never met, because his first letter had been honest in a way that surprised her, because he had asked what she wanted and then actually waited for the answer. She was not going to cry over 29 words written by a man who was not even the one she had come for. She was going to need nails, 8-penny nails a pound at least, rope, tar paper if the general store carried it. She stood up, smoothed her skirt, walked back out into the July heat. The town was 2 miles east down a rutted dirt road. She had seen it from the stagecoach window that morning. A main street, a general store, a saloon, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. Maybe 200 people if you counted generously. She walked the 2 miles without stopping. By the time she pushed open the door of Gould's General Store, her face was red and her feet ached and she was breathing harder than she wanted to be. A small bell above the door announced her. The man behind the counter was thin with spectacles sitting low on his nose. Harold Gould. He looked up when she came in, and his eyes went from her face down and back up again in the way eyes do when they are making a quick assessment and trying to look like they are not. It was a look Vera had been receiving her entire adult life. She was a large woman, broad through the shoulders, heavy through the middle. She had spent a long time wishing she was built differently and a longer time being tired of wishing. She walked to the counter. 8-penny nails, she said. £1. Good rope. Tar paper if you have it. Harold blinked. You building something? Fixing something? The Hale homestead west of town. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just a small shift, something moving behind his eyes. The look of a man who knows more than he is going to say. You'd be the woman Daniel Hale wrote to, he said. From Ohio. I'm Vera Hollis from Cincinnati, she said. Do you have the tar paper or not? He had it. Out back. 2 rolls. He did not say much while he wrapped the nails. Vera counted her coins on the counter. $47 was not nothing. In 1887 it was 3 weeks of decent wages for a working man. She was going to spend it like it was 400. The door opened behind her. 2 women came in. She heard them stop when they saw her. One of them said something low meant to be quiet. It was not quiet enough. That's her, isn't it? The one who came all the way from Ohio. The other one said, poor thing. It was not the kind of poor thing that meant sympathy. It was the kind that meant she should have known better. The kind that meant, what did she expect coming all this way, a woman like that? Vera set the last coin on the counter, picked up her package. Thank you, Mr. Gould. She walked to the door, opened it, stepped out into the heat. She stood on the wooden sidewalk for a moment. The sun hit her full in the face. She pressed both hands flat against her hips, breathed once slow all the way down. Then she looked up. There was a woman standing across the street, on the other side of the road near the entrance to the dress shop. She was younger than Vera, maybe late 30s, dressed well better than most women on this street. Her hair was pinned neatly. Her hands were clasped together in front of her, held tight, the knuckles pale. She was not looking at the dress shop. She was looking at Vera. Not the way the 2 women inside had looked, not assessing, not pitying. She was looking the way a person looks when they have been standing in one place for a very long time and have just seen something move. Then she looked away, turned and walked quickly toward the far end of the street. Vera watched her go. She had spent 20 years fitting fabric to people's bodies, reading the way they stood and held their shoulders and where the tension lived in their frames. That woman across the street was carrying something she had been carrying for a long time, something she had gotten good at hiding. Vera filed it away. Then she started the 2-mile walk back west. She made 3 trips before sundown. The first trip she carried the nails and the rope and a small jar of salt pork she bought because she had not eaten since the day before and her hands were starting to shake. She ate the salt pork sitting on a flat rock in the yard, not because she was ashamed to be seen, because there was nowhere else to sit. The second trip she carried the tar paper and found hanging on a nail inside the east wall an old hammer with a cracked handle wrapped in dried leather. She tested it against her palm. Solid enough, she kept it. The third trip she did not go to town at all. She walked the property instead. 40 paces north to south, 60 paces east to west. A dry creek bed 30 yards north that might run in spring, a kitchen garden possible on the south side if she could get water to it. Fence posts every 12 feet around the perimeter, most of them listing needing to be reset. By the time the sun dropped behind the western hills, she had pulled 12 boards from the collapsed roof section and stacked them in the yard. 4 were split beyond use. 8 were not. She set the 4 aside for kindling, measured the 8 with her handspan. Her hands were bleeding before she finished. The boards had rough edges. She had not thought to bring gloves. By the third board she had opened a cut across her right palm that kept reopening when she gripped something. She tore a strip from the bottom of her petticoat and wrapped it, and kept working. The light was going gray when she finally stopped. She went back inside, sat down on the floor of the east room with her back against the solid wall, unwrapped her hand in the near dark. The cut was ragged, but not deep. She pressed the cloth back against it. She pulled the contract from her wooden box. Not the letter. The contract. The one she had signed in the lawyer's office in Cincinnati 3 weeks ago, the one Mr. Alderton had summarized for her in 10 minutes while she nodded and thought she understood. She had the whole contract, every page. She had kept it in the box with her needles and her thread because it was the most important thing she owned, and she was not going to leave it in a travel bag where it could be lost or stolen. She opened it. She read from the beginning, every word. By the light of the small oil lamp she had brought from Cincinnati, that lamp fitting perfectly in its corner of the wooden box. She read all 4 pages of the contract that Daniel Hale had drawn up with his own lawyer and signed with his own hand 6 months before he died. Page 1. Standard terms. Her name, his name, the property description. Page 2. The homestead arrangement, her right to reside and improve. Page 3. The obligations of both parties. Page 4. The addendum, small print, the kind of text a person skims because a lawyer has already told them the important parts. Vera did not skim it. She read every line. And on page 4, in a section that Mr. Alderton in Cincinnati had mentioned only in passing, she found something she had not fully understood until right now. She read it again, then a 3rd time. She set the contract down on the floor in front of her. The lamp made a small sound. Outside, the cottonwood tree moved in the evening wind. This was a private contract, not a federal statute. Daniel Hale had written this clause himself, added it in his own hand before signing. It said that if the first party to the agreement died before the contract was executed, and if the second party had already incurred travel expenses exceeding 500 miles in reliance on the agreement, the second party retained the right to reside on and improve the property. Furthermore, the second party could seek compensation from the estate for those documented travel costs. Clifton Hale could not evict her without a court order, and she had traveled 900 miles. She had the train tickets. She had a receipt from the rooming house in St. Louis where she had spent one night changing lines. She had documentation of everything because she was a woman who kept documentation of everything because no one had ever done her any favors, and she had learned early that paperwork was the only thing that did not lie. Clifton Hale did not just lack the legal standing to remove her, he owed her money. Vera looked at the cracked ceiling above her. She looked at the walls she had not yet repaired. She looked at the hammer on the floor beside her hand, the old cracked-handled hammer she had found on a nail in the east wall, and she thought about Daniel Hale, who had built this place with his own hands, and then spent his last months writing careful letters to a woman in Ohio asking what she wanted from her life. He had known his brother. He had written this contract knowing exactly who Clifton was. He had been protecting her from a man he shared blood with. From beyond his own death in careful legal language on page 4 of a private contract, Daniel Hale had left her something to stand on. Vera did not smile. It was not a smiling moment. She just sat in the near dark with the contract in her lap and felt something settle in her chest. Something that had been loose and rattling since the train whistle blew this afternoon went quiet. She wrapped her hand again. Lay down on the floor. The boards were hard. The room smelled of old wood and dry dust and something faintly like cedar. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she had work to do. The second day was harder than the first. She woke before sunrise with her back aching from the floor and her right palm throbbing where the cut had opened again in the night. The east room was gray and cool. The cottonwood tree outside was completely still. That particular stillness of early morning before the heat arrives and everything starts moving. She sat up, rewrapped her hand with a fresh strip of cloth, drank water from the canteen she had filled at the creek south of town the afternoon before, ate the last of the salt pork cold. Then she went to work. The south wall was her biggest problem. It was standing, but just. The corner post on the southwest side had shifted in the ground, and the whole wall was leaning outward at an angle that was going to become a collapse in the next hard rain if she did not address it. She could see where the original builder had tried to fix it once years ago. The attempt had not held. She spent the morning trying to work out the right approach. She was not a carpenter. She had watched her father patch buildings on their farm in Ohio for the first 15 years of her life. She knew the principles. But knowing how something should work and making your hands do it correctly are two different things, and the southwest corner was teaching her that lesson with some firmness. By midday, she had tried 3 different configurations for a brace, and none of them had held long enough to drive a nail. She stopped, sat on the flat rock in the yard, drank water. She was looking at the south wall and thinking through the geometry of it when she heard the horse. She did not look up right away. She was in the middle of working something out, and she needed to finish the thought. "You're doing that wrong." The voice came from the edge of the yard, a man's voice, low, not unfriendly but not particularly friendly either, the voice of someone who had made an observation and was stating it plainly without much interest in how it was received. Vera looked up. He was on horseback at the edge of her property, a large man, sun-dark skin, salt and pepper hair under a worn hat. His hands on the reins were the hands of someone who had been doing heavy work since they were young. Thick-knuckled, permanently calloused, the kind of hands that look capable even when they are doing nothing. He was looking at the south wall, not at her. "The brace needs to go diagonal," he said, "not vertical. Corner posts need diagonal support or the pressure just pushes them further out." Vera looked at the wall, then back at him. "If you can see what's wrong from out there," she said, "you can come in here and show me." A pause, longer than she expected. Then he swung down from the horse without further comment and walked into the yard. His name was Samuel Greer. He told her this while he was looking at the corner post, running his hands along the wood, pressing his palm flat against the surface the way you do when you are trying to feel which direction the pressure is coming from. "Track north of here," he said. 2 miles up." "Vera Hollis," she said. "Ohio. Long way." "Texas is bigger than I thought." He almost said something to that. She could see it cross his face and then go away again. He showed her the diagonal brace, not by doing it for her. She noticed that quickly. He explained where the support needed to go, showed her the angle with his hands, and then stepped back and let her figure out the execution. When she got the board into position, he held it steady without being asked, 2 sets of hands being simply more practical than one, and she drove the nail. When it held, she stepped back and looked at it. "Good," she said. He nodded once. They worked through the rest of the afternoon without saying much. That was fine with Vera. She had never been someone who needed to fill silence, and Samuel Greer seemed to have no interest in filling it either. He helped where help was practical. He did not take over. He did not explain things she had not asked to have explained. He treated her the way you treat someone who is capable of learning and simply has not had the specific information yet. It was a simple thing. It should not have been as unusual as it felt. Late in the afternoon, while she was nailing a tar paper patch onto the worst section of the roof and he was resetting a fence post that had been bothering him since he walked past it, she asked him without looking up from her work, "Do you know who owned this land before Clifton Hale?" She heard him stop, not hesitate. Stop. The difference between a man pausing to remember and a man going still because he has been asked something he was not expecting. "Family called Marsh," he said. "Robert and Eleanor Marsh." "What happened to them?" The fence post work resumed, the sound of the mallet coming down. "Land changes hands," he said. "Way land does." The answer was not an answer, but the way he gave it told her more than the words. She had been fitting fabric to people's bodies for 20 years. She knew the difference between a man who did not know something and a man who had decided not to say it. She let it go. For now. When the light went fully gold and started to gray, Samuel picked up his tools. He stood in the yard with his horse. "Well on my property," he said. "North of here. Better than walking to town. My hand Jake will be at the fence line at sunup. He'll walk you to it." "I don't want to put you out." "You won't." She looked at him. "Why are you being decent to me?" He pulled on his riding gloves, smoothed each finger, took his time with the answer. "Because somebody ought to be," he said, "and because this land deserves better than what's been done with it." He mounted up, rode north. Vera stood in the yard until the sound of the hoofbeats faded into the hill country dark. She looked at what she had done that day, the south wall still standing, the brace holding, 3 sections of tar paper on the roof that had not been there this morning. She had done most of it herself. She went inside. She sat on the floor of the east room with her back against the solid wall, and she did not do anything for a while, just sat. The lamp was low. The cottonwood moved outside the window hole where the glass was missing. She thought about the woman across the street from the dress shop, the tight-held hands, the look on her face. She thought about Harold Gould behind his counter and the way his expression had shifted when she said the name Hale. She thought about Samuel Greer stopping when she asked about the Marsh family. A small town is a collection of silences, every person holding something they have decided not to say, and usually the silences are about nothing much. but sometimes they are all about the same thing. She pulled the contract from her box. Read page 4 again. Then she put it away and lay down and did not dream at all. The morning of the third day before the heat arrived, she sat on the flat rock in the yard with her hands on her knees, and she thought about something she had not let herself think about until now, last year, Cincinnati. The afternoon Mrs. Morrison had come to her at the shop. Vera had been the best seamstress on Baker Street for 11 years. Everyone knew it. No one disputed it. Mrs. Morrison was retiring. She had run her shop for 30 years. The location was good. The clientele established the price fair. She wanted someone who knew the work to take it over. She had come to Vera first. Vera had said no. Mrs. Morrison had looked surprised, asked if she was sure. Vera had said yes. She was sure. She had gone home that evening and sat at her kitchen table for a long time without being able to explain to herself why she had said it. She knew why. She had always known. She had stood in front of the large mirror in the fitting room of Mrs. Morrison's shop and looked at herself and thought, who is going to walk through the door of a shop run by a woman who looks like me? That was the real wound. Not 29 words from Clifton Hale. Not the looks in the general store. Not the women in the stagecoach window who had whispered about her when they thought she could not hear. The real wound was the moment she had decided for everyone else what they would think, before they had a chance to think it. She had made the decision on their behalf and called it being realistic. She had told herself no before anyone else had the opportunity to. 34 years old, and she had been doing that for most of them. The cottonwood tree moved in the early morning air. She had walked 900 miles from that fitting room mirror. Not literally, but close enough. She had packed a bag and bought a train ticket and come to a state she had never been to, and was now sitting in the yard of a ruined house that she intended to fix, and not one person in Calderfield, Texas had asked her permission to be here or offered her approval or told her she was doing the right thing. And she was still here. She stood up, picked up the hammer. That was the only answer she had. Not a revelation, not a moment of clarity that changed everything. Just standing up, picking up the hammer, going back to work. The south wall held through the third day. She was working on the front door frame trying to get it plumb again when she heard the wagon coming up the road from town. She did not stop what she was doing. The door frame was close to right, and if she moved now she would lose the measurement. The wagon stopped at the edge of the yard. Two women on the bench, one heavy-set late 40s with a face that was working hard to appear casual. The other thinner, sharper, not working nearly as hard. "Miss Hollis," the heavier one called. Vera drove the last nail, stepped back, looked at the door frame, straight enough. She turned around and walked to the wagon. "We're from the Ladies' Aid Society," the heavier woman said. "I'm Nora Taft. This is my sister June." She gestured to the wagon bed, a covered basket, a folded quilt. "We bring something for newcomers." "That's kind of you," Vera said. Nora climbed down with the ease of a woman who had done it 10,000 times and handed Vera the basket. "Cornbread, a crock of beans, dried apple slices." "It's plenty," Vera said. "Thank you." June had not climbed down. She was looking at the south wall, at the tar paper on the roof, at the new brace on the corner post. Her expression was careful, reading. "You've been busy," June said. "I have. All by yourself. Mostly. Samuel Greer came by yesterday afternoon." Something passed between the two sisters. Vera caught it. A quick exchange of eyes, quickly neutral again. "He's a quiet man," Nora said. Not quite a statement, not quite a question. "He is. Been out on that north tract a long time, by himself." Nora glanced at the homestead. "He doesn't usually come down this way much." Vera looked at her steadily. "He said your well in town is better than walking to town." "It is," Nora said. She paused. There was something she was deciding whether to say. "Miss Hollis, if Clifton Hale sends anyone out here to talk to you about the property, you don't have to let them on your land." "I know," Vera said. Nora looked at her, really looked, taking stock. "Good," she said. She climbed back onto the wagon bench, gathered the reins. June was still watching Vera with that careful look. "You need anything from town," Nora said. "You come find me. I'm at the millinery most mornings." "Thank you," Vera said. The wagon turned and headed back east. Vera watched it go. She ate the beans cold, standing in the yard at midday when the heat finally forced her off the roof. She ate the cornbread. 2 handfuls of dried apple. She was hungrier than she had realized. Her body was burning through everything she gave it. She was thinking about water supply and whether the silted-up well on the east side of the yard could be cleared without specialized equipment when she heard the horse again. She knew it was not Samuel. She had already learned the sound of his horse. A gray roan with a slightly uneven rear stride. This was something different, faster, coming harder. It stopped at the edge of her yard, throwing a small cloud of dust. The man who got down was not someone she had seen before. He was perhaps 40, broad through the chest, a face that might have been reasonable once before something settled into it and stayed. He was dressed better than a ranch hand, but not as well as a lawyer. He wore his hat pulled low enough that she had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. He looked at the work she had done, slow, deliberate, like a man calculating something. "You're Vera Hollis," he said, not a greeting. "I am. You're on Hale land." Vera set down the hammer she had been carrying, crossed her arms. "I'm on land I came 900 miles to be on," she said. "If Clifton Hale has a legal objection to my presence, I'll discuss it with him directly." The man smiled. It did not reach anywhere near his eyes. "My name is Pete Good," he said. "I handle arrangements for Mr. Hale. He'd like his property back." "What property is that?" "This property. I have a signed contract with Daniel Hale granting me residence and improvement rights on this homestead," Vera said. "The contract is dated, witnessed, and fully executed. Do you have a court order?" Pete Good looked at her, recalibrating. She could see it happening. He had come here expecting a woman who would fold quickly, and she was not folding, and that did not fit what he had prepared for. "You've got 2 weeks," he said. "Then Mr. Hale files the proper paperwork." He got back on his horse. "Mr. Good," Vera said. He paused without turning fully around. "Tell Clifton Hale I said thank you for the property. The roof is in better shape than he left it." Pete Good rode east without answering. Vera stood in the yard until he was out of sight. Then she sat down on the flat rock very carefully and pressed both palms flat against her thighs. Her hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, from the particular adrenaline of holding yourself steady when everything in you wants to come apart. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks before Clifton Hale filed whatever paperwork he intended to file. She had $41 remaining. She had a hammer and a crock of borrowed beans and a contract on page 4 of which Daniel Hale had left her something to stand on. She sat there exactly long enough to let the shaking stop. Then she stood up, picked up the hammer, and went back to work. That evening she sat on the floor of the East Room and unwrapped her hand for the 3rd time that day. The cut was healing just barely. A new callus was forming around the edges of it. Both palms were rough in ways they had not been 3 days ago. The soft skin of a seamstress, a woman who worked with fabric and thread, was already beginning to change. She had spent 20 years hiding her hands when company came. Too large, too wide, not the kind of hands that suggested refinement or delicacy. She had sewn gloves for other women and worn her own whenever the weather gave her an excuse. She looked at her hands in the lamplight. They were not pretty. They were going to be less pretty very soon. But they had braced a wall today. They had driven a nail true. They had held steady in front of Pete Good when everything inside her wanted to shake. She opened the contract to page 4, read it again, made sure she still understood it the way she had understood it the first time. She did. She put the contract away, took out the small notebook she had bought at Gould's General Store that afternoon on her second trip to town, opened it to the first page. She wrote the date. She wrote what she had done that day. Every board, every nail, every measurement. She wrote Samuel Greer's name and the fence post he had reset and the brace configuration he had shown her. She wrote Pete Good's name and the time he arrived and exactly what he had said and exactly what she had said back. Then she wrote Nora Taft's name and June's. She was beginning to understand something. The contract was paper. Paper mattered. But what happened on this land day by day with her own hands and whoever came to help her, that was also evidence of something. Evidence of a life being built. She was going to document all of it. She closed the notebook, set it beside the contract in the wooden box, lay down on the floor, listened to the cottonwood move outside. Listen to the night sounds of Texas, wide and dark and indifferent, not hostile, just vast in the way that places are when they do not need you, but will accommodate you if you insist on being there. Vera Hollis had come 900 miles because she had not had anywhere better to be. That was still true. She did not have anywhere better to be. But lying there on the floor of the East Room on the third night, she noticed something that had not been true on the first night. She was not waiting to go back. She was not making plans to leave. She was not calculating how long she had to stay before she could reasonably admit it had not worked and return to Baker Street and her rented room and the life that fit her the way a dress fits when the measurements are wrong, but you have worn it long enough to stop noticing. She was thinking about the south wall, about whether the brace would hold through the night, about the well on the east side of the yard, and whether a single woman with a shovel could clear out 20 years of silt without help. She was thinking about tomorrow. That was different from the first night. That was different from most nights she could remember. She closed her eyes. The cottonwood moved. The Texas dark settled around the house like something patient. She slept without dreaming. Thomas Price had a desk that told you everything about him before he opened his mouth. It was covered in paper, not the organized chaos of a busy man who knows where everything is, actual chaos. Briefs stacked on top of letters, stacked on top of land filings, stacked on top of what appeared to be someone's grocery list from 3 weeks ago. Ink stains on the blotter. A coffee cup with the ring of 100 mornings dried into the ceramic. A law degree on the wall. The frame slightly crooked, the ink on the certificate still looking new because it was new 3 years old at most. Nora had brought Vera here on the 5th day. Thomas Price was 31 years old and looked like a man who had taken on more work than he had hours for and had made his peace with that arrangement. He looked up when they came in, and his eyes went from Nora to Vera and then down to the papers on his desk and then back up again. He did not offer them chairs because both chairs in the office were occupied by more paper. He moved the paper. They sat. Vera put the contract on his desk. He looked at it without picking it up. "I can't take this case," he said. Nora started to say something. Vera put her hand on Nora's arm. "Why not?" Vera said. "Conflict of interest." "With who?" Thomas picked up a pen, set it down, looked out the window at the main street of Calderfield baking in the morning heat. Vera watched him. 20 years of fitting fabric to people's bodies. You learn to read a person through what they do with their hands, how they hold their shoulders, where their eyes go when they are choosing between two things. Thomas Price was not looking out that window because he was thinking. He was looking out that window because he could not make himself look at her. "You're afraid of Clifton Hale," she said. It was not an accusation. She said it the way you state a fact about the weather. Thomas turned back from the window. His shoulders came up slightly, the reflex of a man who has been accurately described and does not like it. "I have a wife," he said. "2 children. The youngest is not yet 2 years old." "I know that's real," Vera said. "I'm not dismissing it." She reached over and slid the contract across his desk until it was directly in front of him. "Read page 4 before you say anything else." He looked at the contract, then at her. Then he picked it up. He read. The office was quiet except for the sound of the street outside and the distant noise of someone working metal at the blacksmith shop 2 doors down. Thomas read page 4 twice. She could tell by the movement of his eyes. He set the contract down. "The compensation clause," he said quietly. Daniel Hale wrote it himself, added it in his own hand before signing. His lawyer in Dallas confirmed the addition was made by the primary party before execution. Thomas looked at the clause again. "If I win this," he said more to the paper than to her, "the percentage would be." He did not finish the sentence. He was doing arithmetic in his head. "Enough to settle the gambling debt," Vera said, "with enough remaining to matter." Thomas looked up fast. Vera met his eyes and held them. "Calderfield is a small town," she said, "and I listen carefully." The blacksmith's hammer rang out twice, then stopped. "I need 2 days," Thomas said. Vera stood up, smoothed her skirt. "I'll be at the homestead," she said. She and Nora walked back out into the heat. They were halfway down the main street before Nora said anything. "How did you know about the debt?" "June told me this morning when she brought the bread. She didn't mean to. She mentioned that Thomas had been avoiding the saloon for 3 months and that Clifton Hale had been unusually pleasant to him lately. Vera kept walking. When a man like Clifton Hale is unusually pleasant to someone, it means he has something on them. Nora was quiet for a moment. "You worked all that out this morning?" "I had time to think while I was clearing the south fence line." They walked on. The cottonwood at the edge of town cast a thin stripe of shade across the road. They passed through it and back into the sun. "There's something else," Nora said. She said it the way a person says something they have been holding for a while, carefully, feeling the weight of it. "About the land, about the Marsh family." "Tell me." "Eleanor Marsh. She was a good woman, hard-working. After Robert died, she tried to keep the place going by herself for almost a year. Then one day there was a transfer document, and the land went to Rufus Hale, Clifton's father." Nora paused. "Eleanor left Calderfield that same winter, went east to be near her daughter. She never came back." "What do you know about the transfer?" "Only what people said at the time, that Eleanor had signed it, that she'd had no choice because of debts." Nora stopped walking. Vera stopped with her. "But Eleanor Marsh did not have debts, Miss Hollis. I knew that woman. She was careful with money the way women who have had to be careful all their lives are careful. She did not owe anyone in this county anything when Robert died." Vera stood in the middle of the road. "You've known this a long time," she said. "A long time. And you never said anything." Nora's jaw tightened. "Saying something costs money. Lawyers cost money. Courts cost money. And Rufus Hale owned 4 of the 7 men on the county board. His son owns 3 of the current ones." She looked at Vera directly. "I am saying something now." They stood there for a moment in the July heat. "Thomas Price," Vera said. "He doesn't belong to Clifton Hale." "No, that's why Clifton is trying to acquire him." Vera started walking again. She had work to do. 2 days later, Thomas Price sent word through Nora that he needed to see her. The note said urgent. He had underlined the word twice. She found him standing when she arrived, not sitting behind his chaotic desk, but standing in the middle of the small room. The desk cleared. For the first time, she could imagine papers organized into several distinct stacks, each one held down with a different heavy object because he did not seem to own enough paper clips. He had been awake most of the night. She could see it in the way he was holding himself, that particular tightness around the eyes of a person running on something sharper and thinner than sleep. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. He went to the desk, picked up the top sheet from the first stack. "I pulled the land records for this county back to 1860, he said. "The Marsh Homestead, Robert and Eleanor Marsh. Federal Homestead Grant, 1866. Fully executed, legitimate in every particular. And after, Robert Marsh died March 1867. Thomas set the sheet down, picked up the next one. "There is a transfer document in the county record dated September 1867, 6 months after Robert's death, signed Eleanor Marsh. But I found 3 letters written by Eleanor Marsh, one to her daughter in Tennessee dated April 1868, one to a cousin in Kentucky dated August 1868, one to the county clerk himself dated January 1869, requesting a copy of her late husband's homestead paperwork." He laid all 3 letters on the desk in front of Vera. She looked at them, at the signatures. Eleanor Ann Marsh. Every time. All 3 letters. The full middle name written in the same careful hand. She looked at the transfer document. 2 words, Eleanor Marsh. The room was very quiet. "She signed her full middle name," Vera said. "Every time. In every document I found, every letter, a bill of sale from 1864, a church record from 1865. Thomas looked at her steadily. "The transfer document has 2 words. The signature does not match the verified samples in letter formation or in the pressure pattern of the ink." Vera looked at the 2 documents side by side. "Rufus Hale forged it. That is what the evidence suggests. I cannot prove it in those words yet, but the irregularity is significant enough that a circuit court judge would have to take it seriously." Thomas paused. "There is something else." He picked up a single sheet from the 3rd stack. The transfer document has a witness signature. One witness. Someone who was present when the document was supposedly executed and signed their name to confirm it. He held the sheet out to her. Vera took it. Looked at the witness line. Samuel H. Greer. She stood very still. The ordinary sounds of a Tuesday morning in a town that did not yet know what was sitting on Thomas Price's desk. She set the sheet down on Thomas's desk. "You've sent a telegram to the Marsh family," she said. "Owen Marsh, Eleanor's son. He's been in New Mexico for the past 12 years, running a small cattle operation." Thomas picked up his pen. "I sent the telegram yesterday morning. Given the distance and the routing through Santa Fe, we should have a reply within 4 or 5 days. Vera nodded. "How long before Clifton Hale files the court order?" "Pete Good told you 2 weeks. That was 5 days ago, so 9 days at the outside. And the hearing. If I file a counter-filing today, we can request an emergency injunction to block any eviction proceeding pending investigation of the title irregularity." Thomas looked at his papers. "Judge Everett Crane rides the circuit through this county. He's due in Calderfield in 11 days. He is not a man who belongs to anyone." Vera looked at the document with Samuel Greer's name on the witness line. "I need to speak to someone," she said. "I know who you mean." Thomas's voice was careful. "He's been out on that north tract for a long time, Miss Hollis. What he knows and why he has kept it to himself this long, that is his story to tell or not tell. But I will say this." He set his pen down. "I do not believe Samuel Greer is a bad man. I believe he is a man who made a decision when he was very young and has been living inside that decision ever since without being able to find the door." Vera picked up her coat from the back of the chair. "Thank you, Thomas." She walked out into the morning, turned north. She walked the 2 miles to Samuel Greer's property at a steady pace without hurrying. Hurrying would not change what she was going to find when she got there. She found him working alone on the fence line at the north edge of his property. He was resetting a post that had heaved up in the winter freeze and not come back down straight. Good methodical work. The kind that required patience and accuracy and not very much thought, which was perhaps why he was doing it today. She stopped 10 paces away. "Samuel." He turned around, looked at her face. He set the mallet down. He knew. She could see it happen. The moment a man recognizes that the thing he has been waiting for has finally arrived. He did not run. He did not pretend. He just stood there and let it land. "You know," he said. "I know." The wind moved through the grass on the hillside. Far away, cattle moved in a slow drift toward the water tank. "I was 17 years old," he said. "Tell me." He looked at the fence post, at his hands, at the middle distance where nothing in particular was happening. "Rufus Hale hired me on seasonal in the spring of 1866. I needed the money. My father had died that winter. I was the oldest. There were 4 younger ones." He stopped, started again. "Rufus was not a cruel man exactly. He was a man who wanted things and found ways to get them and did not spend much time thinking about the cost to other people. That is a particular kind of person, not violent, just indifferent to what happens on the other side of what they want." "He asked you to witness a document." "He said it was a land transfer. Said Eleanor Marsh had agreed to sell the property because she couldn't manage it alone after Robert died. Said she'd already signed and just needed a witness to confirm the execution." Samuel's jaw moved. "I didn't read it carefully. I trusted my employer. I was 17 years old and I needed the job and I signed my name." "When did you know what it actually was?" "About a year later. I overheard Rufus talking to his lawyer. The way the lawyer described the transfer, the way Rufus laughed." He stopped. "I went to Rufus the next day, told him I knew, that the signature wasn't Eleanor's, that I'd been in town the week the document was supposedly executed, and Eleanor Marsh had been at the church quilting circle every day that week and nowhere near any lawyer's office." "What did he say?" "He said my name was on the witness line. He said if I went to anyone I'd be named as a party to the fraud. He said a 17-year-old ranch hand's word against a property owner and county board member would not go anywhere good for me." Samuel finally looked at her directly. He was right. That's the part I've had to live with. He was not wrong about how it would have gone. Vera stood with her hands at her sides. "But you could have said something later." When Rufus died. When things changed. I could have. His voice went flat, not defensive, just honest. I told myself the Marsh family had moved on, that Eleanor was gone east, that the son was in New Mexico, that opening it up again would cause more harm than good to people who had already found a way to live with what happened. He paused. That is what I told myself. I don't know how much of it I actually believed. The grass moved on the hillside. The truth is I had built my life here, he said. This tract, this herd, 20 years of work, and saying what I knew would have meant tearing up the ground I was standing on. He looked at his hands. That is not an excuse. It is what happened. Vera was quiet for a moment. Eleanor Marsh spent the rest of her life thinking she had failed, she said. Her son told me in a letter Thomas received yesterday. She believed she had let the land go through her own weakness, through debt, through not being strong enough after Robert died. She died in Tennessee believing that about herself. Samuel closed his eyes. One breath. Then he opened them. I know. You knew that might be true and you stayed quiet. Yes. She did not say anything more about it. There was nothing more to say that he had not already said to himself 10,000 times on this hillside over 21 years. I need you to testify at a civil hearing in 11 days, she said. About what you witnessed, about what Rufus Hale told you, about what you know the transfer document to actually be. I could be charged. Thomas Price says the circumstances. 17 years old, employed, not fully informed of what you were signing, coerced into silence afterward. All of that is mitigating. Significantly mitigating. Especially if you come forward voluntarily. He can't promise anything. No, he can't. Samuel looked at the fence post he had been working on when she arrived, at the mallet on the ground. 21 years, he said. Not to her, to the air, to the hillside, to something he had been carrying up here alone for a very long time. Long enough. He looked at her. I'll be there, he said. Vera nodded once. She turned and walked back south. On the 8th day, Dottie Hale came. Vera was writing in the notebook when she heard the knock. 3 knocks. Not the demanding pound Pete Good had used. Softer. The knock of someone who has made a decision and is committed to it but is still aware of what it costs. She opened the door. Dottie Hale was dressed for travel. Not a visit. Travel. A coat buttoned to the throat despite the July heat. A bag over her arm packed and closed. She had the look of a woman who had thought through every step of the next 12 hours and was now executing them one at a time. Vera stepped back from the door. Dottie came in. She looked around the room the way a person looks at something they have been imagining from a distance. The repaired walls, the straight door frame, the tar paper on the roof that had stopped the east corner from leaking during last week's rain, the notebook open on the floor, the wooden box with the contract inside. I didn't know what it would look like, Dottie said. Inside, the stove in the east corner was working. Nora had sent her friend Ruth 2 days before. Ruth was a woman who had spent 30 years cooking on difficult equipment and had known within 5 minutes what was wrong with the flue. She had fixed it without ceremony and left without staying for coffee. Sit down, Vera said. Dottie sat on the flat rock that Vera had moved inside to use as a seat. She set her bag on the floor, opened it. She took out a small notebook, brown cover, dense handwriting on every page. She held it out to Vera. 3 years, Dottie said. Every month, every transaction Clifton made that had no receipt, no documentation, no legitimate business explanation, the payments to 2 members of the county board, the payment to the man who damaged James Fuller's water pump last spring. She paused. The payments to Pete Good for things that were never written down anywhere official. Vera took the notebook, opened it, looked at the first page. The handwriting was meticulous. Dates, amounts, names, observations. The work of a woman who had spent 3 years building something carefully and quietly while the person she lived with had no idea. Clifton thinks I don't pay attention to the household accounts, Dottie said. He has believed that for 23 years. I have never corrected the impression. Vera looked up from the notebook. You've been preparing for a long time. Since last spring. Since Fuller. Dottie's voice was even. No tremor. The steadiness of someone who has already done their grieving and is now on the other side of it. I was standing at the upstairs window when Clifton sent Pete Good to damage Fuller's pump. Fuller had been 2 weeks late on the land rent because his south field flooded in March. 2 weeks. Clifton sent Pete Good in the middle of the night. She looked at Vera directly. I watched from the window. Clifton did not know I was home. He thought I was at my sister's. A pause. I was not at my sister's. Vera closed the notebook. You have a lawyer in Fort Worth, she said. Dottie's chin came up slightly. Since February. He has been building the separation agreement since March. Clifton has no knowledge of any of it. You planned all of this before I arrived. I was waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances. Dottie looked at the walls of the homestead around her. You arriving and refusing to leave was not the cause of what I'm doing, Miss Hollis. It was the event that told me the moment had come. Vera held the brown notebook in both hands. If I take this to Thomas Price, Clifton will know you took it. Yes. He'll be very angry. Yes. Dottie said it the way a woman says something she has already measured from every angle and decided she can carry. I have lived inside Clifton's anger for 23 years. I know its dimensions exactly. It is large, it is unpleasant, and it cannot touch me from Fort Worth. She met Vera's eyes. I am not doing this because you helped me, Miss Hollis. I want to be clear about that. I am doing this because I was ready to do it, and you gave me the right moment to act. Vera looked at the notebook in her hands. Then she looked at Dottie. That's better than doing it out of fear, she said. Yes, Dottie said. I decided it would be. Something shifted in the room. Not drama. Not a grand moment. Just two women sitting in a half-repaired house in the Texas heat. One of them having just done the most irrevocable thing of her adult life, both of them understanding exactly what it meant. Is there anything you need tonight? Vera said. I am going to Nora Taft's house. She is expecting me. Dottie stood, picked up her bag. My Fort Worth lawyer arrives on the morning coach in 3 days. The hearing with Judge Crane is 2 days after that. By the time Clifton understands the full shape of things, it will be too late to change them. She walked to the door, paused. One more thing, she said. She reached into her coat pocket, took out a single folded sheet. This was in Clifton's locked file box. The key was in his desk. I made a copy 3 months ago. She held it out. I believe Thomas Price will recognize what it is. Vera unfolded it. It was a letter, written on the letterhead of a law firm in Dallas, dated 1869, addressed to Rufus Hale. She read it, then she read it again. The letter referred to a meeting between Rufus Hale and the Dallas firm in which they had discussed the land transfer from Eleanor Marsh. The firm had advised Rufus in careful legal language that the transfer document as executed carried significant risk of being challenged if the Marsh family ever retained legal counsel due to certain irregularities in the execution. Rufus Hale had kept the letter, and Clifton had known about it, had kept it locked in his own file box for how long? Vera looked at Dottie. He knew, Vera said. He's known since before his father died. Rufus showed him everything, told him everything, told him to keep it quiet, and it would stay quiet. Dottie buttoned the top button of her coat, even though it was still warm. Clifton has spent 20 years keeping it quiet, not because he is evil, Miss Hollis, because he is afraid. He built his entire life on what his father stole, and he has never known how to stop. She walked out. Vera stood in the doorway and listened to her footsteps fade down the road toward town. She looked at the letter in her hand. Then she looked at the brown notebook. Then she walked inside and added both items to the wooden box with the contract and the notebook and the train ticket stubs from Cincinnati. The box was getting heavy. 9 days after arriving in Calderfield, Owen Marsh sent his reply. Thomas brought it to the homestead himself. He arrived on horseback just before noon, which told her it was important because Thomas Price did not ride out to people's properties. He was a man who stayed at his desk and let people come to him. The fact that he was sitting on a horse outside her front door meant the telegram had said something worth moving for. She was on the roof when he arrived. She climbed down. He handed her the telegram without preamble. She read it. Owen Marsh, Santa Fe Relay. He had received Thomas's message. He knew about the land. He had been trying for years to understand what had actually happened to his mother's property. He was already traveling. He would arrive in Calderfield by Friday. 4 days. Vera read it twice. The man whose mother had spent her last years believing she had failed. The man who had grown up in New Mexico thinking his family's loss was his mother's weakness. The man who was now on a train moving east toward a county he had not been in since he was a young man, toward a truth that had been locked in a file box and buried in county records for 21 years. He was already traveling. Thomas was watching her face. "The hearing is Monday," he said. "Judge Crane arrives Sunday evening. Owen Marsh arriving Friday gives us the weekend to prepare his testimony." Vera folded the telegram. "Clifton Hale is going to know all of this before Monday," she said. "Pete Good watches everything in this town." Though Nora had mentioned that morning that Pete had not been seen at his usual spot outside the feed store for 3 days, that he had been replaced on some errand by a younger man she did not recognize, and that Pete had the look of a man who had been told to stay home and did not know what to do with the instruction. "By tomorrow afternoon at the latest, Clifton will know about Owen Marsh, about the injunction we filed this morning, and about Dottie." Thomas paused. "He may come out here." Vera looked at the homestead, at the south wall standing straight, at the tar paper on the roof, at the door frame she had plumbed and nailed herself on the 3rd day. "Let him come," she said. Thomas looked at her for a moment, the way a man looks when he is revising something he thought he understood. "There is one more thing you should know," he said, "about Samuel Greer." "Tell me." "The night before you came to see him, he had already been to my office." Thomas adjusted the reins in his hands. "He came at closing time, said he had information about the marshland transfer that he had been holding for 21 years and that he believed it was time to say it. He had not yet heard that you knew his name was on the document." Vera looked at Thomas steadily. "He came before I went to him." "Yes." She looked back at the homestead. 2 things could both be true at the same time. Samuel Greer had stayed silent all those years. And Samuel Greer had found his way to Thomas Price's office the night before Vera confronted him on his own, carrying his own decision. Neither of those facts erased the other, but both of them were true. That night was the quietest since she had arrived. No wind, the cottonwood perfectly still. The heat settled into the ground and stayed there. She sat on the floor of the east room with the lamp low and the notebook open, and she wrote until her hand cramped. 16 days of documentation. 16 days of nails and boards and tar paper and conversations and names and dates and exactly what each person had said and done and when. Thomas had told her to keep filling the notebook. "The building is your evidence," he had said. "Every improvement, every day of occupancy, every witness who had seen her work." She had taken that to heart. She closed the notebook, put it in the box, lay down on the floor. She thought about Monday, about standing up in a courtroom in front of a judge who did not know her, about telling the truth about who she was and why she had come and what she had done, about standing up in front of people who had decided what she was before she spoke a single word and speaking anyway. She was not afraid of that. Or rather, she was afraid of it, but she had been afraid of things before and had discovered that fear was not a reason to stop. She was 34 years old. She had been the best seamstress on Baker Street in Cincinnati for 11 years. She had said no to a good opportunity because she did not trust herself to deserve it. She had traveled 900 miles on the word of a man she had never met and arrived to find 29 words from his brother telling her to go home. She had not gone home. She had picked up a hammer and gone to work. And now, on day 16 of 17 days, she would spend before that courtroom lying on the floor of a house that was not yet hers, but was more hers than anything she had ever owned. She understood something she had not been able to see clearly when she stepped off the train. She had not come here because she had nowhere better to be. She had come here because some part of her, some part that had been waiting quietly for a long time, had understood that she was capable of more than she had allowed herself to try. Daniel Hale had asked her what she wanted, and she had told him. In careful letters and honest words, she had told a stranger what she had never said plainly to herself. She wanted ground she could stand on. She had found it. She had built it nail by nail, day by day in the July heat of a Texas summer. Monday she was going to walk into a courtroom and tell a judge exactly how she had done it. She closed her eyes. Outside, the cottonwood was completely still. No wind at all, just the weight of a Texas night settling around the house, and somewhere to the north, 2 miles up the hill, a lamp going dark in a window she could not see from here. Owen Marsh stepped off the Friday morning coach and stood in the middle of Calderfield's main street for a long moment before he moved. He was 41 years old, lean through the middle, broad through the shoulders, with the permanent squint of a man who had spent 2 decades working under a southwestern sky. His hands were the hands of someone who had never stopped working even when the work belonged to someone else's land. Scarred across the knuckles, thick at the joints, the kind of hands that do not know how to be still. He stood there and looked at the street and at the buildings and at the church steeple that leaned slightly left and at the general store where his mother had bought flour and salt and thread for the years she had lived here. Vera was waiting at the edge of the street with Thomas beside her. Owen walked toward them. He did not smile. He did not perform relief or gratitude or any of the other things people perform when they arrive at the end of a long journey. He just walked toward them with the deliberate pace of a man who has been moving toward this particular moment for longer than the train ride from New Mexico. He stopped in front of Vera. "Miss Hollis," he said. "Mr. Marsh, thank you for coming." He looked at her for a moment, at her hands, at the calluses and the faded scar on the right palm, and the general look of a person who had been doing hard physical work for more than 2 weeks. "My mother wrote about this town," he said. "I have 31 letters she sent from here before she left. She wrote about the cottonwood trees, about the way the hills looked in the early morning light." He paused. "She never wrote about the transfer. She never mentioned Rufus Hale. I used to think that was because it was too painful." He looked at the street. "Now I understand she didn't write about it because she believed it was her own failure, not something done to her." Vera did not say anything immediately. She let that sit in the air between them where it belonged. "Thomas has the documents at his office," she said. "He'll walk you through everything we have." Owen nodded, picked up his bag. "Let's go see them," he said. Thomas's office had never held so many people. Vera and Owen and Samuel and Nora all stood or sat in various arrangements, while Thomas spread the documents across the cleared desk and walked Owen through each one. The original homestead grant, the verified letters with Eleanor's full signature, the transfer document with its 2-word signature, the Dallas law firm letter that Dottie had taken from Clifton's locked file box. Owen did not speak while Thomas talked. He looked at each document for a long time before nodding for the next. When Thomas got to the transfer document, Owen leaned forward. He looked at the signature line for a full minute without saying anything. Then he put one finger near the paper, not touching, just pointing. "Eleanor Ann Marsh," he said. "She signed everything that way, her full name, always." He straightened up. "I have a bill of sale from 1863 she signed for a plow horse. I have the deed to the property she and my father bought together in 1864 before they filed the homestead. I have her church membership record from 1865. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat, took out 3 envelopes worn at the edges from being handled many times over many years. He set them on the desk beside the transfer document. "Every one of them," he said. "Eleanor Ann Marsh. 3 words, every time she ever put her name to anything in her life." The room was very quiet. Thomas looked at the documents side by side, at the full signatures in Owen's envelopes, at the 2 thin words on the transfer. "Will you testify to this Monday?" Thomas said, not really a question. "You could not stop me," Owen said. Thomas picked up his pen, made a note, made another. Samuel was standing near the window. He had been standing there since they came in, slightly apart from the others, not removed, but not fully inside the group either. The stance of a man who understood he was present on different terms than everyone else in the room. Owen had looked at him once when they came in, a long look. Then he had looked away and not looked back. Now, as Thomas organized the documents and Nora asked questions about the timeline, Owen turned toward Samuel. The room did not go entirely quiet, but it shifted, the way a room shifts when something important is happening in one corner of it. Owen looked at Samuel Greer. Samuel looked back. "You were there," Owen said, quiet, not accusing, just the fact stated plainly. "I was there," Samuel said. Owen was silent for a moment. His jaw moved once. "My mother spent the last 11 years of her life in Tennessee," he said. "She lived with my sister. She had a small room with a window that looked out onto a garden. She tended that garden every spring and every summer until she could not anymore." He paused. "She never stopped talking about the land here, about Texas, about the house my father built. But she talked about it the way a person talks about something they lost through their own fault. She carried that." Samuel did not look away. "I know," he said. "She didn't fail," Owen said. "She was robbed." "She was robbed," Samuel said. "And I knew that, and I said nothing." Owen looked at him for a long time. "Why are you here now?" he said. "Because someone finally made it possible to be here," Samuel said. "And because 21 years is long enough to carry a thing before you put it down." The room was quiet. Owen looked at Thomas. "He's testifying Monday." "He is," Thomas said. Owen looked back at Samuel one more time. Then he looked at the documents on the desk. "All right," he said. "Tell me what I need to know for Monday." The weekend moved slowly in the way weekends move when something large is waiting at the end of them. Vera worked. She reset the last 2 fence posts on the north line. She dug out the silted well on the east side of the yard, which took most of Saturday and left her covered in grayish mud from the knees down and aching in every muscle she owned. When the water came through at the bottom clean and cold even in the July heat, she sat on the edge of the hole and felt something she had not expected to feel right then, something that started in her chest and moved outward, something close to joy, though she was too tired for joy and too muddy for dignity, and the combination made her laugh once short and surprised into the afternoon air. Samuel came Saturday afternoon without being asked. He looked at the fence posts she had already reset, and then looked at the remaining ones and picked up the post hole digger without discussion. They worked in parallel for 2 hours without saying much. That silence between them had its own texture now. Not the silence of strangers, not the silence of people who had nothing to say. The silence of 2 people who had said the important things and did not need to keep saying them. Around the 3rd fence post he said, "You nervous about Monday?" "Yes," she said. No hesitation. "Good," he said. She looked at him. "People who aren't nervous walking into a room like that either don't know what's at stake or don't care about it," he said. He drove a nail into the post cap. "You know, you care." He looked at the fence line. "That's not a weakness." She drove her own nail, straight and clean. "I've been nervous before," she said. "I've done the thing anyway." "I know," he said. "I've watched you do it for 2 weeks." They finished the fence line as the sun went down behind the western hills, stood side by side, and looked at it. Straight, solid, every post true. "North line runs right along your property," Vera said. "It does," Samuel said. "You ride that line every evening." "Most evenings. Year or 2 now." She looked at the line of posts stretching north toward his land. Then she looked at him. 5 years, she said. "That's what the homestead requires." "That's a long time." Samuel looked at the fence line, at the posts they had just set, at the ground between them and his property 2 miles north. "I spent more years than I want to count on this hillside carrying something I should have put down a long time ago," he said. 5 years sounds different to me than it sounds to most people." Vera looked at the posts, at the straight line they made. "Then I'll be here," she said. Neither of them said anything more about it. They did not need to. Nora came Sunday evening. She brought food from her own kitchen and sat with Vera on the flat rock in the yard while the heat finally began to ease. They ate without much ceremony, 2 women in a yard that smelled of fresh-turned earth and new lumber, and the particular clean smell of a well that has just been opened after years of sitting closed. "He sent a message through Pete Good," Nora said. She meant Clifton. "To Dottie, through Nora's door. Told her if she came back before Monday, he'd make things easier at the hearing." Vera looked at her. "Dottie's answer?" Nora answered the door. "Told Pete that Mrs. Hale wasn't receiving and that any legal communication should go through her Fort Worth attorney." Nora's mouth curved at the corner. "You should have seen Pete Good's face." Vera almost smiled. "Is Dottie all right?" "She's better than all right." She's been sleeping better at Nora's than she's slept in years. That's what Nora says. Nora looked at her hands in her lap. She told me last night that the worst thing she was afraid of was Clifton finding out what she'd taken from that file box, and that already happened and she was still standing. A pause. She said everything after the worst thing is easier than the worst thing. Vera thought about a train platform in Cincinnati, about a travel bag and a wooden box and 29 words in a pocket. "That's true," she said. "That is exactly true." They sat in the cooling dark and did not talk for a while. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Nora said. Vera looked at the homestead, at what she had built, at the straight door frame and the patched roof and the braced south wall and the cleared well with its clean water and the fence line running true along the north edge of her property. "I've been getting ready since the day I stepped off that train," she said. Monday came the way important days come, hard and clear and bright with nowhere to hide from any of it. Vera dressed carefully. She did not have a court dress. She had the dark blue cotton she had arrived in washed twice and pressed as flat as she could manage with a heated pan. She put her hair up for the first time since she had come to Calderfield, looked at her hands before she left the house. She did not try to hide them, did not look for gloves, did not apologize to herself for what they had become. These hands had braced a wall, had driven a nail straight, had cleared 20 years of silt from a well and found clean water at the bottom, had held steady in front of Pete Good when everything inside her wanted to shake, had written 16 days of documentation in a brown notebook that Thomas Price said was the cleanest evidence of lawful occupancy he had seen in 3 years of practice. These were her hands. She was going to walk into that courtroom with them, and she was not going to apologize for a single thing they had done. The courtroom was half full when she arrived and filling. She had not expected so many people. Walt Briggs was in the third row. 60 years old, the longest continuous land deed in the county, a face like weathered hardwood. He had come without being asked and without explanation, and had simply sat down in the third row as if he had always intended to be there. Nora and June. Eli from Samuel's ranch in a clean shirt that made him look younger than he was. 2 men from the feed store she had nodded to on the street but never spoken with. The woman who ran the laundry. 3 or 4 others she recognized from the main street without knowing their names. People who had their own history with Clifton Hale. People who had been watching from a distance and had decided quietly and without announcement which side of this they wanted to be on. Clifton was already seated at his table. His Fort Worth lawyer was silver-haired and precisely dressed with the settled confidence of a man who had won a great many cases and expected to win this one. Clifton sat beside him with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the wall above the judge's bench. He did not look at Vera when she came in. Pete Good was not in the room. She noticed that. Owen Marsh was in the second row. He met her eyes when she entered and gave her one short nod. The nod of a man who has come a long way for a specific purpose and is ready to execute it. Samuel was near the back, standing at first. Then he found a seat and sat, and she could see from the set of his shoulders that he was already carrying what he was about to do in the full weight of it. Thomas was at the plaintiff's table with his organized stacks of paper and his ink-stained fingers and the particular alertness of a man who has been awake since 4 in the morning reviewing every word he intended to say. Judge Everett Crane came in without ceremony. He was perhaps 60, not tall, compact and deliberate in his movements. He had a face that suggested he had heard every version of every argument a human being could construct and was interested primarily in the part that was actually true. He sat down, put on his reading spectacles, looked at the room over them without particular expression. "We'll begin," he said. The first hour was legal architecture. Thomas laying the foundation, Clifton's Fort Worth lawyer challenging it, Judge Crane listening with a patience that was not passive. He was keeping score. Vera could see it in the small movements of his pen on the pad in front of him. Every point that held every point that did not being marked somewhere in the precise economy of his attention. Clifton's lawyer argued the documents Dottie had provided were improperly obtained, that the chain of title was valid on its face and had stood for 21 years without challenge, that Vera Hollis had no legal standing to be in this courtroom. Thomas argued that the validity of a title cannot be established by its age alone, that evidence of fraud does not expire, that Vera Hollis had a signed contract, documented improvements, and 17 days of witnessed residency that established her standing under Texas homestead law as clearly as anything he had seen in 3 years of practice. He put the notebook on the table. Crane looked at it. "May I see that?" he said. Thomas carried it to the bench. Crane read it for 6 minutes. The room was completely silent. Then he set it down and looked at the documents Thomas had organized on the plaintiff's table. "The transfer document," Crane said, "dated September 1867, signed Eleanor Marsh." "Yes, Your Honor." "And the verified samples of Eleanor Marsh's signature." "Also before the court, Your Honor. 3 letters in the hand of Eleanor Marsh, written in 1868 and 1869 each, signed Eleanor Ann Marsh, full middle name, consistent with all other verified samples we were able to locate." Crane looked at Clifton's lawyer. "Your client's position is that the transfer is valid?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Then he won't object to the court examining the handwriting comparison directly." A pause. "Not long, but real. We would need time to retain a handwriting expert," the Fort Worth lawyer said smoothly. "The deceased's son is present in this courtroom," Thomas said. "He has 3 original letters written by his mother in 1868 and 1869. He can speak to her consistent practice of signing her full name." Crane looked over his spectacles at Clifton's lawyer with an expression that was not quite a smile. "Then we won't need to wait for an expert," he said. "Call your first witness." Vera watched Clifton from across the room. He had not moved. His hands were still flat on the table. His eyes had left the wall above the bench sometime during the last exchange and were now looking at nothing in particular in the middle distance. The look of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and can feel it beginning to slip. Owen Marsh took the stand. He sat straight, looked at the judge, not at Clifton, not at the lawyer. At the judge, because the judge was the only person in this room whose opinion was going to matter in the next hour. He read 3 passages from his mother's letters into the record. Not the emotional parts, not the parts about missing the land or grieving Robert or missing her children. He read only the closings, the signatures. Eleanor Ann Marsh, Eleanor Ann Marsh, Eleanor Ann Marsh. Then he placed the letters on the table Thomas had set up near the bench and let Judge Crane compare them to the transfer document himself. The room did not breathe. Crane looked at the letters, looked at the transfer, back to the letters. His pen moved once on his pad. "The full middle name," he said, almost to himself. "In every verified document, Your Honor," Thomas said quietly, "over a span of 7 years. The practice was consistent without exception." Crane set the documents down. He looked across the room at Clifton Hale. Clifton met his gaze, held it. Whether that was courage or calculation, Vera could not determine. Perhaps Clifton himself could not. Crane looked back at Thomas. "Your next witness." Vera took the stand. She had been afraid of this part in a specific and concrete way, not of speaking. She had never been afraid of speaking, but of being looked at, of the room looking at her and deciding what she was before she had said a word. A large woman, a woman who did not look like what a woman presenting herself in a Texas courtroom in 1887 was supposed to look like. A mail-order arrangement that had not worked out. A woman who should have known better. She knew some of them were thinking it. She had been in enough rooms to know when people were thinking it. She sat in the witness chair. She looked at Judge Crane, and she did not look at anyone else. He asked about the property. She told him what it looked like the day she arrived. Board by board, wall by wall, the collapsed roof and the hanging door and the cracked clay yard and the one cottonwood tree that was still alive. He asked about her improvements. She told him, every day, every repair. She had the notebook, but she did not need it because she had written it all down, and the act of writing had fixed it in her. She spoke for 12 minutes without pausing, without stumbling, without looking away from Crane's face. When she stopped, he looked at her over his spectacles. "You've maintained daily records," he said. "From the first evening, Your Honor, I understood that what I did on that land was my strongest evidence of lawful occupancy." "Who suggested that to you?" "No one. I understood it from reading the contract carefully." Crane wrote something on his pad. Clifton's Fort Worth lawyer stood for cross-examination with the polished ease of a man who had done this many times. "Miss Hollis, he said pleasantly. "You came to Calderfield under a private arrangement that is no longer operative." "I came under a signed contract that contains a valid residency clause," Vera said. "The arrangement between myself and Daniel Hale was for more than a personal arrangement. It was a legal instrument. Thomas Price can speak to the specific statutes. The individual who signed that contract is deceased. The contract remains executed. A person's death does not void a contract they have signed unless the contract specifically provides for that. This one does not. It provides for the opposite." The lawyer smiled. "And you have no formal claim to the property?" "I have a valid private contract with a residency clause. I have 17 days of documented occupancy and improvement. I have witnesses to both. And I have the backing of Texas homestead law as it applies to lawful occupants who have improved a property." She looked at him without expression. "Would you like me to be more specific?" Someone in the room made a sound, quickly controlled. The lawyer tried twice more. Each time Vera gave him a short, specific, documented answer that closed whatever door he had tried to open. He sat down before she expected him to. Crane looked at her over his spectacles. "Miss Hollis," he said, "how long have you been on this property?" 17 days as of this morning, Your Honor. "And you have maintained documented records of your improvements each day?" "Yes, Your Honor." He looked at the notebook still on the table, then at Thomas. Then he made a decision she could see form in the steadiness of his expression. "Call your next witness," he said. Samuel Greer walked to the stand the way he had walked toward the fence post that needed resetting on the second day she knew him, deliberate, without excess. The walk of a man who knows what the work requires and is going to do it. He sat down, he looked at Judge Crane, and he told the truth. He told it the way he had told it to Vera on the hillside, methodically, in order, every fact in its place. Rufus Hale in 1866, the document he had been asked to witness, the moment a year later when he understood what he had signed, the threat that had followed that understanding, the years of silence that followed. The room was completely still while he talked. Clifton Hale had gone very quiet at his table. His Fort Worth lawyer put a hand on his arm at one point and said something low and fast. Clifton did not respond. He was looking at Samuel with the expression of a man who has been waiting for a particular thing to happen for a very long time and is now watching it happen and is too tired to be surprised by it. Thomas asked the essential question. "Mr. Greer, you are stating under oath that you were present when the transfer document bearing Eleanor Marsh's name was created?" "Yes." "And that Eleanor Marsh was not present?" "She was not present. She did not sign it. I watched Rufus Hale write her name on that document himself." The room exhaled. Clifton's lawyer was on his feet immediately with objections. Crane let him make them. Then Crane denied them. "The witness is testifying to direct personal observation," Crane said. "Proceed." Thomas looked at his notes, then at Samuel. "One more question, Mr. Greer. You have acknowledged that you signed this document as a witness, knowing that Eleanor Marsh had not been present for its execution. Can you explain to the court why you are testifying to this today?" Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Because Eleanor Marsh spent the rest of her life believing she had failed her family," he said. "And she did not fail. She was robbed. And the people who did it to her used my name and my silence to do it." He looked at his hands, then back at the judge. "I cannot give her back what she lost. I cannot undo what I signed or what I failed to say. But I can say it now on the record in front of a judge where it will stay, and that is what I am doing." The room was quiet for a long time after that. Even Clifton's lawyer did not stand for cross-examination immediately. He leaned toward Clifton. They had a short, quiet conversation. The lawyer's face was carefully neutral. Clifton's face was not. Then the door at the back of the courtroom opened. Pete Good walked in. Not with Clifton, not toward Clifton's table. He walked straight to the front of the room and stopped near the clerk's desk. "I need to speak to the court," he said. Clifton was on his feet before the sentence was finished. "Pete." Good did not look at him. "I have worked for Clifton Hale for 20 years, he said. His voice was flat and even, not emotional, not performing. the voice of a man who has made a calculation and is now executing it without sentiment. In that time I have carried out instructions on his behalf that included the deliberate destruction of James Fuller's water pump in April of this year. I also have direct knowledge of 3 other instances in the past 5 years in which Clifton Hale directed me to take actions against tenants or neighbors who had disputes with him. I am prepared to give names and dates. The room erupted. Crane's gavel came down twice, 3 times. Order returned slowly. Clifton was still standing. His face had moved through several expressions and had arrived at something that was not quite any of them. He looked at Pete Good across the room, just looked at him. Pete Good looked back. "I've been doing your work for 20 years, Good said, not loud, almost conversational. "You hired someone younger last month and told me to stay quiet. I've been quiet long enough." He sat down. Clifton's Fort Worth lawyer put both hands on the table and leaned toward Clifton and began speaking in a very quiet and very urgent voice. Crane looked at them. "Counsel, I will give you 10 minutes." Recess was 10 minutes. Vera sat with Thomas and did not speak. She could hear the room behind her, the low, constant sound of people who have just witnessed something unexpected and are processing it in the way people process things in small rooms quietly and collectively. Samuel came and sat beside her. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Owen Marsh came and sat on her other side. He looked straight ahead at the empty judge's bench. "Whatever happens in there," he said quietly, "what you did, coming here, staying, starting all of this." He stopped, started again. "My mother is buried in Tennessee. I'm going to go there after this. Tell her what happened here." His voice held the particular steadiness of a man controlling something carefully. "She deserves to know the truth," finally found a place to stand. Vera looked at this man with his worn hands and this man with his worn hands and his long years of wrong information about his mother, and she felt something for him that was clean and clear and had no complicated edges. "It mattered to me too," she said. "Before I even knew about her. The land was wrong. I could feel it." Owen nodded once. They sat in silence until Crane came back. When court resumed, Clifton's lawyer stood and requested an adjournment. 24 hours to review the new testimony and advise his client. Crane denied it. "We have sufficient evidence before this court to issue a preliminary finding on the title question," he said. He picked up the notebook from the table. Vera's notebook. He had been holding it during the entire recess. The transfer of the Marsh homestead property dated September 1867 shows material irregularities that are inconsistent with a valid title conveyance. The witness signature on that document has acknowledged under oath that the document was executed fraudulently. He set the notebook down. He looked at Clifton. "Mr. Hale, pending formal investigation by the Federal Land Office, I am placing a hold on all title transactions related to this property. No eviction proceedings may be initiated against any current lawful occupant." Clifton sat very still. "You will present yourself to this court's jurisdiction for follow-up proceedings within 30 days. Crane paused. "The additional testimony regarding your conduct toward tenants in this county will be referred to the county prosecutor's office for review." He looked at Thomas. "Furthermore, Miss Hollis's documented residency and improvements establish her standing as a lawful occupant under Texas homestead provisions. She will remain in residence pending the federal title review." He picked up the notebook one final time, looked at it for a moment. "Miss Hollis." "Yes, Your Honor." "Keep filling this notebook." "Yes, Your Honor." The gavel came down. Outside in the July heat, everything happened at once and then went quiet. Thomas shook her hand with both of his. He looked lighter than she had seen him since the first morning she put the contract on his desk. The federal timeline would be long. The land office moved at its own pace. Clifton would fight what he could. But Thomas's percentage of the compensation clause was already secured in the court record, and they both knew it. Whatever came next, that particular weight had lifted from him. He said something about federal timelines and land office procedures that she followed well enough to understand. This was not finished. It would take months, possibly longer. There were still 3 men on the county board who owed him something. But the ground had shifted. Everyone in that courtroom knew it. And in a small town, what everyone in a courtroom knows becomes what everyone in the town knows before sundown. Owen Marsh stood on the courthouse steps and looked at the street below. Vera stood beside him. "What happens to the land?" she said. "If the federal review goes the way Thomas thinks." Owen was quiet for a moment. He looked at her hands, at what they had become in 17 days. "The Marsh grant gets voided. The land reverts to federal homestead status." He paused. "You've been in occupancy. You've improved it. You have witnesses and documentation that Thomas says is cleaner than anything he's seen." He looked at her directly. "You file a proper homestead claim and you work that land for 5 years, Vera Hollis. It becomes yours by law." She had to breathe carefully for a moment. 5 years. "My mother did not fail," Owen said. He was not looking at the street anymore. He was looking somewhere further away. "She was robbed, and then she spent the rest of her life carrying the wrong story about herself." He turned to Vera. "I don't want that to happen again on the same ground." He picked up his bag from the step beside him. "I'm going to Tennessee," he said. "Before I go back to New Mexico, there's someone I need to talk to." He held out his hand. "Thank you, Miss Hollis, for staying when you had every reasonable reason to leave." She shook his hand. He walked down the steps and into the street and did not look back. Samuel was waiting at the bottom of the courthouse steps. He looked at her face when she came down and read something in it that made him exhale slowly. She stopped 2 steps above him, so that they were at the same height, and looked at him directly. "Federal title review," she said. "Could be 6 months, could be longer. Thomas says those processes don't move quickly. I know how they go. I have to stay on the property, keep the notebook, keep building." She paused. 5 years from a proper homestead filing, that's what Owen said. Owen knows that process better than most. She looked at him. At the man who had ridden into her yard on the second evening and held a beam steady and shown her the diagonal brace and never once tried to do the work for her. Who had come before she asked him to Thomas Price's office carrying his own decision about what he needed to finally say. "The fence line," she said carefully. "The one you ride every evening. It runs right along the north edge of my property." He looked at her. "Runs right along," he confirmed. 5 years is a long time." "I've been riding that line for 2 years already," he said. "Before you got here. Just habit, I suppose. The land on the other side of it." He looked north, then back at her. "Some habits don't need a reason to continue." Vera looked at him for a long moment. At the weathered face and the still eyes and the hands that had been carrying something heavy for longer than she had been in Texas and had finally put it down. "Then I reckon I'll be there," she said. He touched the brim of his hat. She turned and looked at the street of Calderfield, Texas in the afternoon sun. Nora and June coming down the courthouse steps arm in arm. June already talking rapidly, and Nora nodding with the expression of someone trying to be patient. Walt Briggs shaking Thomas Price's hand with the gravity of an old man who knows when something has been set right after being wrong for a long time. Owen Marsh's back disappearing around the far corner of the main street heading for the coach station in Tennessee, and a grave in a garden that deserved a different story than the one it had been given. Dottie at the edge of the crowd, standing apart, watching. She caught Vera's eye and nodded once, the nod of a woman who has done what she set out to do and is now moving toward what comes next. Her Fort Worth lawyer was already on his way back south. The separation agreement was already in motion. Clifton Hale was going to have a great deal to manage in the coming months, and none of it was going to be what he had planned. Vera looked at all of it. Then she turned and began walking west, 2 miles. She knew the road now, knew every rut and every place where the clay went soft after rain, and every spot where the cottonwood trees along the creek cast a stripe of shade across the path. She had walked it enough times in 17 days that her feet knew it without her having to think. She walked without hurrying. The heat was beginning to ease toward evening. The hills to the north had gone gold and amber in the late light. She was thinking about the well, about the water that had come through clean at the bottom after 4 hours of digging, about the south wall that had held through last week's rain, about the doorframe she had plumbed herself on the 3rd day, and that had been true ever since. She was thinking about the kitchen garden she was going to plant on the south side as soon as the heat broke in September, about the window on the east wall that still needed glass, about the floor of the East Room that she had been planning to replace when she had the time and the materials. 5 years of work. She was not afraid of that. She had been doing hard work her entire adult life, and this would be harder and more satisfying than any of it. She would have a well that was hers, and a fence line that was hers, and a kitchen garden in October soil, and a roof that did not leak. She would have Samuel Greer riding the north fence line every evening. She would have Nora and June and the occasional visit from Thomas with news from the Federal Land Office and the slow, certain progress of a legal process that was finally moving in the right direction. She had built all of that. Not just the wood and the nails, all of it. The lawyer and the notebook and the testimony and the women who had shown up with food and the man who had ridden into her yard on the second evening and treated her from the first moment like someone who was capable of learning anything she needed to learn. She had built all of it. The homestead came into view as she rounded the last curve in the road, the west side of it catching the late sun. The south wall braced and straight, the tar paper on the roof dark but holding, the door frame true and square, the cottonwood in the corner of the yard turning its leaves in the evening air. She stopped at the edge of the yard and looked at it for a moment, then she walked in. She checked the south wall first, running her hand along the brace the way you check something you built when you want to confirm it is still what you made it. It was. The brace was solid, the corner post was true. She checked the roof by looking up from inside, moving slowly from the east room to the west, checking the tar paper seams she had sealed 4 days ago. Holding, all of them holding. She walked to the east room, sat down on the floor with her back against the solid wall, the wall that had been standing when she arrived, the wall that had held everything up while she learned what she was doing. She was still learning. She pulled both letters from the wooden box. Not the contract. The letters. The letter that had started everything, and the letter that Thomas had sent this afternoon. 29 words from Clifton Hale. Cold and short, and meant to end something before it began. Thomas's letter. Vera Hollis. Documented residency confirmed. Homestead application accepted for filing pending federal review. 5-year period to begin upon official filing date. She held them side by side for a long time. Then she stood up. She carried Clifton's letter to the cook stove that Nora's friend Ruth had fixed on the 8th day. She opened the grate, looked at the letter one more time. 29 words. She put it in, watched it catch, watched the paper curl and darken and go to ash. The particular orange of burning paper bright for a moment and then gone. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel the particular sharp satisfaction that she had sometimes imagined she might feel in a moment like this. She felt finished with it. She felt the way you feel when you set down something heavy that you have been carrying for so long you stopped noticing the weight until the moment it leaves your hands. And then the absence of it is so complete that you have to stand still for a moment and feel the difference. She closed the grate. She put Thomas's letter carefully inside the notebook between the pages, closed the notebook, put it in the wooden box with the contract. She sat down on the floor, back against the east wall, the wall she had not built and had not needed to. She looked at her hands in the last light coming through the east window. Not the hands she had arrived with, not the careful hands of a woman who had spent 11 years working with silk and cotton thread and the soft fabrics of other people's important days. Not the hands she had hidden under gloves and kept out of sight when company came. These hands had braced a wall, had driven a nail true in the dark before sunrise on the 3rd day when the center beam shifted and needed resetting before she had even had her coffee, had cleared 20 years of silt from a well and found water at the bottom, had written 16 pages of documentation in a brown notebook that a circuit court judge had held in his hands and read carefully and then told her to keep filling. These hands had placed a contract on a lawyer's desk and told him to read page 4. These hands had opened a door in a rainstorm for a woman who had finally found the right moment to act. They were not beautiful. They were not small. They were not the hands of the woman who had stood in front of a fitting room mirror in Cincinnati and decided she was not worth the risk of trying. They were the hands of a woman who had gotten on a train with $47 and a wooden box and a contract she had not yet read carefully enough, and had stepped off in a strange town and walked into a ruined yard and picked up a hammer. She had built something. Not just the walls and the roof and the fence line and the cleared well. She had built the right to be here, day by day, nail by nail, page by page. From outside, through the east window she had not yet glazed, came the sound of the cottonwood moving in the evening wind, the first stars appearing in the Texas sky, the wide, dark patience of land that has been here longer than any of the people who have argued over who it belongs to and will be here long after all of them. Vera Hollis closed her eyes. She had come 900 miles because she had not had anywhere better to be. She had nowhere better to be now. But for the first time in her life, nowhere better to be was exactly where she wanted. She did not dream of the fitting room mirror. She did not dream of the train platform in Cincinnati, or the 29 words, or the 2 women in Gould's General Store who had said poor thing without meaning any kindness by it. She slept, in her house, on her ground, in the right place.